What would you do if you were trapped by a wall of massive flames on one side and hundreds of Comanche warriors on the other? In the fall of 1837, a group of Texas Rangers found themselves in this truly terrifying predicament. In a battle against their sworn enemy, the Comanche, the warriors had set fire to the prairie and cut off the Rangers' retreat. The Texians had been lured into a trap. And what happened next would be one of the most brutal, little-known battles in the history of the Old West. Tonight, join History at the OK Corral for the terrifying, true story of the Battle of Little Creek. Fort Smith, Texas, October 13, 1837. In the crisp autumn air, the acrid aroma of burnt coffee beans hangs like a morning fog, mixed with the pungent, ever-present smell of livestock, manure, and campfire smoke. As the regulars of the fort begin their day's work of chores and guard duty, a group of a few dozen grizzled, buckskin-clad men saddle their horses, chuck their single-shot rifles and pistols, and make ready to venture outside the relative safety of the fort's walls. Leading this contingent of men is Lieutenant A.B. Van Bentusen and Captain William Eastland. They confer briefly over the planned course of incursion into what, at this time, is likely the most dangerous territory on the whole of the North American continent. Both men are relative newcomers to their positions in leadership, and, though both feel they have been sufficiently respected in their tenures with the Rangers thus far, their positions as commissioned officers grant them little to none of the deference and obedience that would be expected within the ranks of any conventional military. That is because this is very much not the conventional military. These are the Texas Rangers. The Rangers themselves are a newly founded hybrid force of military and law enforcement that has been stood up by the burgeoning Republic of Texas after its cessation from Mexico in 1836 following the Texas Revolution. The intention of their founding was to recruit a sizable, well-armed, and loosely governed force of highly skilled and requisitely aggressive horseback fighters who could pursue, capture, and kill the hostile tribes and bandits that had been wreaking havoc on Texas settlers. At this time in 1837, anyone living in Texas is living on the bleeding edge of the frontier. The violence that has been wrought here in the preceding years is unlike almost anything else that has been seen on the American frontier. In the years prior to this, tribes like the Waco, the Karankawa, the Apache, and the Caddo had routinely raided homesteads up and down the river valleys and flatland prairies of central and southern Texas. But it is the Comanche who are the most feared. The Comanche were relatively recent arrivals to Texas themselves, having made their way down from the Rockies of Wyoming as part of a perpetually impoverished Shoshone offshoot. However, with the advent of horses from the Spanish making their way north on the plains, the trajectory of Comanche history would be forever altered. The Comanche were soon known as the most innately gifted horsemen of any tribe on the plains. Their newly found elements of speed and mobility have made the Comanche not only a formidable force to anyone who draws their ire, but a veritable war machine. The raiding is so all-encompassing in its violence and ferocity that it would effectively stall any sizable settlement attempts west of Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio until well into the 19th century. It is in fact the reason that on this day, the Rangers now make their way out of the gates of Fort Smith and head into the wilds of the Texas Hill Country. They are searching for a raiding party of Comanche who has stolen a large number of horses from the settlements on the Colorado River. The Comanche have headed northwest towards the open prairies, and the Rangers hope to catch them before they abscond into the vast, empty expanses of the Great Plains. After leaving the fort over the succeeding weeks, the Ranger force makes their way up the Colorado River, trailing the Comanche party. On November 1st, the two officers, Van Bentuzen and Eastland split their forces in order to follow different trails. This reduces Van Bentuzen's force to 18 men. This force follows on north until reaching the Brazos River, where they incite a brief skirmish with a party of Cherokee and Kichai whom they mistake for Comanches. One Kichai is actually killed before the Cherokee are able to make discernible peace signs towards the Texians. This causes no small amount of embarrassment and conciliatory efforts on behalf of the Rangers. The Cherokee and Kichai are, in fact, also avowed enemies of the Comanche, having lost far more of their wives, children, and warriors to Comanche raiding than even the most remote and harrowed frontier settlers in Texas. Once amends have been made, the Cherokee and Kichai are gracious and pragmatic enough to point the Rangers in the direction of the fleeing Comanche party. Despite the loss of one of their own party, their hatred for the Comanche raiders outweighs their disdain for Texian intruders on this particular occasion. The Rangers now take to the trail, but it is another full week of tracking until November 10th, at a location Lieutenant Van Bentuzen marks as latitude 33.5 degrees north on the Trinity River, that the Rangers finally make contact with their intended target. The two parties, Rangers and Comanche, spot each other almost simultaneously. The Comanche are unaccustomed to being followed so far into their own territory, and they have stopped posting their normal sentries. They now immediately split their forces, with some of the younger warriors driving the horse herd off northward and the more experienced warriors heading back to attack Van Bentuzen's force of Rangers. Utilizing tactics that would soon be considered dangerous and outdated with the advent of better weaponry and more combat experience, the Rangers now dismount and prepare to receive the Comanche charge from behind a mound that rises up from the surrounding prairies and woodlands. Lieutenant Van Bentuzen stands on top of the mound to survey the oncoming force, and estimates there to be roughly 150 mounted Comanche warriors, perhaps the finest cavalry in the world, all of them capable of unleashing 10 or more arrows a minute, and all of them coming right at the Rangers at full speed. This means that the Ranger force of 18 men is outnumbered by roughly 8 to 1. These are obviously not favorable odds, and Van Bentuzen and his men are all too aware of this fact. The Rangers now move back from the ridge, deciding to instead receive the Comanche charge from the cover of a small thicket of trees at the base of the ridge. Almost immediately after making it to the timberline, the Comanche are upon them, raining arrows down upon the Ranger position and, as Van Bentuzen describes, uttering the most savage yells. The Rangers, armed with single-shot rifles and pistols, cannot match the volume of fire nor the maneuverability that the Comanches are now so deftly wielding against them. For over 2 hours, the fight rages on, with the intermittent attacks nearly overrunning the Texians several times. Though most of these men have not long been in Texas, they all understand what being overrun by the Comanches would mean for each and every one of them. The rules of plains warfare, especially in Texas, make no concession for prisoners when it comes to military-aged males. Should the Rangers be overrun here, any who are not killed outright will likely be slowly, sadistically tortured to death underneath the looming Texas sun. Even in these early iterations of Texas history, every hamlet, homestead, and burgeoning city had been inundated with tales of Comanche victims being burned, skinned, eviscerated, and emasculated, all while still alive. Every man amongst the Rangers has heard many such tales, and now it takes all of their willpower not to ruminate on those terrible stories and to concentrate on the Comanche warriors in front of them. To add to the already terrifying nature of the battle, Most of the fighting takes place with the Comanche warriors and the Rangers within 15 to 20 feet of each other. Throughout the afternoon, the Comanche unleash intermittent charges, attempting to overrun the Rangers' position. Every time they do so, the air is filled with the war cries of the warriors, the yelling of the Ranger commander, the din of gunfire, and, increasingly, the screams of the grievously wounded. 4 Rangers and 6 horses are killed in the initial fighting, as the Comanche exact a heavy toll on the small force. The Comanche, intent on carrying on with the battle, are fighting under the leadership of an unidentified chief, and though the Rangers do not know his name, his bravery and his influence on his warriors is as sure and apparent as any war chief they have ever seen. Into the late afternoon, the Rangers do all they can to bring this man down, but to no avail. Finally, though, not long before the sun begins to set, a Texian bullet manages to find its target, and the chief tumbles from his mount, dead. In Comanche warfare, this is not just a tactical loss, but a spiritual condemnation as well. They believe the chief's medicine, or puha, has somehow been compromised, indicating that the metaphysical powers that they rely upon are no longer working in their favor. The Comanche warriors now instantly retreat over a ridge and out of sight, leaving the Rangers under the impression that the battle is finally over. But it is not. After about 15 minutes, another Comanche charge barrels over the ridge at full speed. The Rangers, who have been tending to their wounded and making ready to retreat, again take up their defensive positions within the cluster of trees. A new chief is now leading the Comanche, and this attack, as before, comes head-on at the Rangers as they hunker down and do their best to return fire. Suddenly, though, one of the Texians notices a thick layer of smoke rapidly enveloping their small force. After a brief, frantic look around, the source of the smoke is discovered. The Comanche have lit a giant ring of fire around the wooded area, intent on either smoking out the Rangers or watching them burn alive. Left with these 2 options, Van Bentuzen now orders his men into a headlong attack on the Comanche. They are on foot, against a mounted enemy force, and all of them know that their chances of survival are virtually non-existent. But they also know they have no better option. And so, resolved to their fates, the Rangers charge out of the tree line, kneeling to fire and then reloading on the move as arrows fly all around them and the fire rages larger and larger, looming ever closer. This short but incredibly violent charge lasts roughly 10 minutes and leaves 6 more Rangers dead. The tactic does, however, drive the Comanches into another retreat. This leaves a brief but sufficient gap in time in which the Rangers manage to collect their wounded and make their escape on foot to the Sabine River. A full 58 days after they have ridden out of Fort Smith, Lieutenant Van Bentuzen's Ranger force, now just 8 men strong, straggles their way back into Fort Smith. They have been lucky to survive, and they all know it. It will be several more years, and many more lives lost, before the Rangers will learn how to effectively fight mounted Comanche forces in open territory. Until then, fights like this will happen countless times, often with no Ranger survivors. But the many tales of the decades-long war between the Texas Rangers and the feared, mighty Comanche are, for tonight, other stories for other times. 1874. The following facts of one among the most desperate Indian battles ever waged on the Texas frontier were furnished the writer by Mr. Walter M. Robinson, one of the participants, and who still survives and distinctly remembers all of the terrible scenes through which he passed and witnessed on that day. This battle was fought on July 12, 1874 in Lost Valley, Jack County, between the Texas Rangers, 35 in number, commanded by Major John B. Jones and Captain Stevens, and 200 Comanche and Kiowa Indians, as near as their number could be estimated during a 5 hours battle, the Indians being led by Chief Lone Wolf. On the day before the battle, Major Jones, who was in command of all of the Rangers on the frontier, and who went from post to post with an escort inspecting the different companies and paying them off, or adjusting any other matters needing his attention along the border, arrived at the camp of Captain Stevens in command of a Ranger force stationed in Jack County, northwest of Jacksboro by about 50 or 60 miles. On July 12th, a report came to Captain Stevens that Indians were in the country, and it was Lieutenant Wilson who was detailed with 6 men by the captain to take a scout into the vicinity from which the Indians were reported and make an investigation. Walter Robinson, a member of Captain Roof Perry's company, being one of the members of this scout. The detail proceeded about 6 miles and came upon a large Indian trail which denoted a raiding band of Indians of unusual force, and a runner was sent back to camp by the lieutenant to inform Major Jones and Captain Stevens of the fact, and advising a force to be sent out of all the men that could be spared from camp to take up the trail of the Indians and give them battle in case they could be overtaken. In the meantime, while the messenger was speeding on his mission, Lieutenant Wilson and the 5 other men followed slowly on the trail, and in about 12 miles Major Jones and Captain Stevens, with 30 men, overtook them, making the Ranger force now about 35 all told. The combined force now kept on the trail rapidly until 20 minutes before 12 o'clock a.m., when they came upon the Indians in a timbered but rough and rocky country in the Lost Creek Valley, where the Comanches and Kiowas had placed their force in ambush to try issues with the Rangers whom they had discovered on their trail. Before doing this, however, the wily chief had divided his force into 3 bands, and then crossed and recrossed Lost Creek several times on purpose to disconcert and bother the Rangers and cause them to scatter their force in pursuit, following the meanderings of the different trails. But finally, he consolidated his whole force in a motte of timber on the west side of the creek. Before locating the Indians, Major Jones divided his force into 3 squads to follow as many different trails, but admonished each to remain in touch with each other and be ready at any moment to reunite in case of an emergency. The Major with 13 men went to the right and skirted around the foot of some hills and came in close range of the timber in which the whole of the Indian force was concealed, and was fired on by them, which was the first intimation he had of their presence. This volley wounded some horses, and on the heels of it came the charge, the Indians leaving cover and attacking Mr. Jones with great fury in the open prairie. But he stood his ground, and the gallant squad around him opened up a hot fire from their Winchesters into the very faces of the veiling and advancing natives. The other 2 parties of the Ranger force were not long in rushing to the scene of the fierce fight which was now being inaugurated, and the main battle opened up with terrific fury on both sides, the yelling of the Indians almost drowning out the noise of the carbines, which popped and cracked like a canebrake of fire. And in a few moments, Lee Corn was badly wounded with a bullet and his horse killed, besides other horses being wounded. A sweeping charge was now made by the Rangers on horseback, almost in among the Indians, who were thickly massed, and such was their rapid and fatal fire both with revolvers and Winchesters that the Comanches and Kiowa gave way and started in rapid and disordered flight through open ground towards the hills, followed by the now yelling Rangers, who killed them here and there as they were overtaken on slow horses, or having them killed and disabled under them. In about a mile, another skirt of timber was passed through, in which was a ravine made by washings from the hills. But the Indians crossed this and kept on through an open glade for 100 yards or more, and then made a stand on the side of a hill amid the rocks and bushes and opened a severe fire on the Rangers from cover, which checked them and they wheeled back to the ravine and there dismounted. During this fire from the Indians, the horse ridden by Walter Robinson was killed, being hit by 5 bullets, and he went back to the ditch on foot. And a gallant young ranger of Stevens' company named Glass was killed, falling in front before the turn back was made. Also, another ranger named Moore was wounded. The ravine or ditch was shallow, and while the rangers to some extent could protect themselves by lying down, it was not sufficient to cover the horses, and they were hit repeatedly. The Indians fairly swarmed around on the side of the hills, yelling and shooting, and some of them gradually worked around the rangers and shot at them from various points. This gallant little band, however, worthy of the name of Texas Rangers, were not dismayed, but would raise their heads above the ravine, take aim at some particular target, fire, and down again just before another charge was made, at the same time shouting defiance to their dusky foes. In about 20 minutes after the ravine was reached, Zach Waddell noticed that Ranger Glass, whom they thought was dead, was kicking around on the ground and expressed his intention of making a run and bringing him back to the ravine. This looked so much like a man throwing his life away and doing no good that even the officers tried to persuade him from his rash act. But Waddell had his eye on his friend, and all at once leaped out of the ditch and ran rapidly to him, gathered him up in his arms, and started back amid a perfect shower of bullets and demoniac yells of the Indians, and the rangers in the ditch sprang to their feet, regardless of exposure, returned yell for yell and shot for shot with the Indians, and loudly cheered their gallant comrade, who came staggering wounded and with his burden in among them. He was hit by 5 bullets, but none of them inflicted serious wounds, and one of his boots was nearly shot off at his foot, so much so that he could hardly keep it on. Poor Glass never spoke, but lay there and breathed a while, and then died there in the ravine with his comrades around him, with the noise of crackling carbines, whistling bullets, and savage yells in his dying ears. Here for 5 hours the battle was kept up with only short intermissions. The Indians had plenty of good guns and ammunition, and the balls were almost constantly kicking up the dust around the margin of the ravine or hitting rocks and sending showers of scattered lead among the rangers. As before stated, some of the Indians went around the head of the ravine, surrounding the rangers and cutting off Lee Corn and Wheeler and 2 others who had stayed with Corn when his horse was killed and himself wounded, and they were forced to retreat back to the creek and hide themselves in the rank grass and bushes and mud and water in the bank of the creek. The rangers fighting the battle in the dry ravine suffered greatly for water, remaining 5 hours with the hot July sun beaming down on them. Their tongues swelled, and such was their thirst that they dug in the bed of the ravine with their bowie knives to moist the earth and sucked it between their parched lips, which gave some relief. During all of this time, Major Jones exposed himself greatly and made several narrow escapes. Once, he left the ravine and went to a tree and was watching the old chief Lone Wolf to see if he could tell from his actions what his intentions were or what his next move would be. He talked to the boys and told them to be careful now of their cartridges and not to shoot them all away. Captain Stevens also encouraged the boys by word and example, and in fact neither officers nor men showed the white feather during this trying time. While Major Jones was watching Lone Wolf, he sat down and leaned against the tree, with the balls occasionally skipping all around him, and Walter Robinson and Flint Damon said, "Look out, Major, they will hit you directly." And about this time, a hissing ball came and struck the tree near the Major's head, filling his eyes and face full of bark and splinters, and with such force that he fell backwards on the ground as if killed, but quickly recovered himself. About 1 hour before sundown, some of the rangers expressed a determination to leave the ravine in spite of the Indians and go to Lost Creek after water, but all were persuaded out of this notion except for 2, Bailey and Porter, and they mounted their horses and rode off. 200 yards from the ravine, the Indians ran upon them, and killed Bailey in plain views of his companion. His mare, though fleet, failed to run when the Indians came close on account of fright, and reared and plunged until they shot and lanced her unfortunate rider from her back. Porter had better luck, but had a narrow escape for his life. The Indians ran him so close that he was compelled to abandon his horse when near the creek and leap from the high bank into the creek when one Indian was very close, saying, "Me get you, in broken English as he went over. Now, it happened that the place Porter went over was close to the spot where Lee Corn was in hiding, and, thinking that it was an Indian hunting for him, shot at him as he hit the mud and water a few yards away. But, fortunately, he missed, as he had to aim his gun with one hand, having the other arm badly shattered. In throwing the cartridge from the magazine into the barrel, he had to hold the gun between his knees to do so. When night came, the Rangers back at the ravine were in a terrible strait, and a council was held to determine what was best to do. They were nearly exhausted with thirst and strain and shock of battle, ammunition nearly all gone, dead and wounded comrades scattered here and there, and 14 dead horses besides the wounded laying around in the ditch. The Indians had drawn off at dark, and nothing now could be heard of them, and Major Jones asked the boys which they would rather do: remain here until daylight and renew their battle again if the Indians did not leave, or until the soldiers could come from Jacksboro to their relief, for a ranger named John P. Holmes had ridden out of the ravine on a wounded horse in sight of the Indians before night and gone to the fort where United States soldiers were quartered to ask for their assistance. After canvassing the situation thoroughly, the Rangers concluded to leave the ravine and make an attempt to either get to Jacksboro or meet the soldiers. The dead ranger, Glass, was strapped to an Indian horse whose rider had been killed. When all was ready, they silently departed down the ravine, more than half of them on foot, and succeeding in quenching their thirst at a small spring they found, they then kept on for 15 miles to a ranch, and there remained until the following morning and buried their dead comrade. This sad rite was performed by Walter Robinson and others, who then were to return to the battleground with a ranch wagon to bring in the wounded, being preceded by some of the Rangers and a squad of soldiers who had arrived at the ranch before daylight, having been informed of the situation by the Gallant Holmes, who had gotten through safely. A great uneasiness was felt for the boys who had been left scattered in the Lost Creek bottoms, and a hurried return was made to the place by the Rangers and soldiers. But, on arriving there, the wounded Rangers were all gone and could nowhere be found. The fact was developed later that they had left sometime during the night and made their escape to nearby Loving's ranch. The body of Bailey was found near where the fight had commenced. He was badly mutilated, scalped, and full of arrows, besides numerous lance wounds. He was buried near the spot where he met his fate, and since the country has settled up in that locality, a schoolhouse and church stand near his grave, or near the spot where he was killed. It was afterwards learned that 42 Indians were bullet-strucken during the battle, 19 of them dying on the field. The Rangers went back to Jacksboro, bought horses to replace those killed, and then went on into the Llano country. And with that, we conclude tonight's reading. Central Texas, August 12, 1840, near present-day Lockhart, Texas. In the humid, burning dawn so common to Central Texas summers, 24-year-old Nancy Darst Crosby sits dejectedly on the back of an unshod, rough-haired pony. Though her skin is terribly sunburnt, and her thighs horribly chafed from days of riding, she utters not a single word, for she knows it will do no good. All she can do now is to run the harrowing events of the previous few days through her head. She and a number of other captives, mostly women, had been taken during a series of brutal Comanche raids along the South Texas coast. In the preceding days, they had watched their loved ones cut down, their homes burned to the ground, and entire populations of their hometowns scattered into the shallow Texas bays to seek refuge from the attack in wooden merchant ships anchored offshore. They have all come to Texas relatively recently, most of them from frontier states like Kentucky, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Nancy herself is the granddaughter of legendary frontiersman Daniel Boone. She had settled in South Texas, married, and given birth to a son only a little over a year earlier. A blissful family life had seemed all but assured, until the Comanche came on one dreadful day. They had killed her husband and taken her and her baby son captive. The customary Comanche treatment of women prisoners would be termed inhumane by any measure, with assaults of all kinds being an assumed norm, and outright killing of captives being a matter left to the whims of pragmatism. Nancy's whalebone corset had prevented any further assault, but her baby had been summarily executed in front of her when she could not quiet the child's screams. Now, one can only imagine her internal turmoil only days later as she faces yet another day of ceaseless torment. This party of Comanche, though typical in their tactics, is highly unusual, both in the size and scope of the raiding they have committed. They also present a strikingly unusual visual. Many are dressed in the traditional garb of breechcloths and leggings, with headdresses made of buffalo horns, wolf heads, and one even wearing the skin of a sand crane atop his head. They are armed with bows, arrows, 14-foot lances, rawhide shields, and a number of pistols and rifles that they have procured in raiding. But perhaps the most striking sight in this roving, raiding band is the adornment of its warriors in some of the newest, trendiest fashions of the time. Some of the warriors wear top hats, others new leather boots, blankets, lace umbrellas, and brass button coats worn backwards. To top off this bizarre scene, their war horses, lances, and shields are festooned with links of bright red ribbons. The sheer size of this force is also a highly unusual factor. Comanche raiding parties usually strike swiftly and scatter immediately after a raid. But this party includes the wives and children of the warriors, for this is no ordinary raid. It had started when Buffalo Hump had awakened one night having seen a vision in his dreams. The dream came only weeks after the Comanche had suffered the loss of many of their greatest war chiefs in what came to be known as the Council House fight. They had brought in a young captive white girl named Matilda Lockhart in order to trade her surrender for goods and for an agreement to the cessation of any more white trespassing. But the horrendously pitiable condition of the young girl caused such an uproar in the city of San Antonio that an arrest attempt was made. When this was resisted, a brutal fight ensued, in which several citizens of San Antonio, as well as several Comanche men, women, and children, were killed. To be sure, it had been a seminal event in recent Comanche history, and Buffalo Hump and his band of Pennateca Comanche had burned for revenge ever since. But it wasn't until Buffalo Hump reported his vision to his people that a plan for revenge began to materialize. In his dream, he had seen the Comanche and their allies, the Kiowas, driving the white intruders into the waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Those that they were not able to kill outright were expelled from Texas forever. Their victory would be glorious, their spoils innumerable, and redemption for the Comanche would be total. And, up to this point, Buffalo Hump had proven all but prophetic. The Comanche raiding party had indeed cut a torrent of violence south from the Texas Hill Country to the coast, and now they were on their return trip. But now, three factors are working against them as they make their way northeast, back to the limestone and cedar of the hill country. First, the bounty that they had fought so hard to ascertain has now become a burden. The sheer weight of the iron cookware, cloth, clothing, firearms, ammunition, food, and other sundries, not to mention their terribly traumatized and physically compromised captives, have slowed the party's advancement considerably. Secondly, the Comanche had not only broken their typical practice of scattering after a raid, but they were now following the same trail to get back home that they had used to make their attacks in the first place. This made them easy for trackers to follow, which was seldom ever the case after native raids. This led to the third and final problem faced by Buffalo Hump and his sizable contingent. They are now being tracked by the Texas Rangers, as well as a number of local militiamen. This makes a rapid egress all the more important, yet simultaneously more difficult to accomplish. The Rangers, a relatively recently formed force, have thus far presented some of the only consequential resistance to the Comanches in the whole of Texas. They are largely young, violence-hungry men who have come to Texas for the express purpose of tracking, trailing, and killing Comanche. According to the contemporary accounts of this time, their mortality rate was around 50%. These young men are becoming a sizable thorn in the side of the Comanche, but they are also experiencing a sort of Darwinism via combat, in which the weaker or more unfortunate among them are weeded out via hard, often torturous deaths at the hands of the Comanche. Nonetheless, these bellicose young men, armed with revolvers and bowie knives and clad in serapes and buckskin, represent the only hope that Nancy Darst Crosby and her fellow captives have left. If they are not apprehended before reaching the undulating topography of the hill country, they will be taken onto the prairie and likely never seen again. As the Comanche party travels, neither the captives nor their captors are aware of just how close the Rangers are. While the raiding party makes its languid march northwestward, the Rangers are making every move within their power to garner additional forces and to follow the trail of the Comanche. The Rangers' ranks include men whose names will soon become legendary in the annals of Texas history: Bigfoot Wallace, Ben and Henry McCulloch, Matthew Old Paint Caldwell, Ed Burleson, John Tomlinson, and Jack Hayes. They have been tracking the Comanche with the help of their Tonkawa scouts, under their chief, Placido. The Tonkawa are a tribe native to central Texas who have been devastated for generations by Comanche raiding and expansion. All too often unheralded in conventional narratives of the Old West, native scouts are essentially the only trackers skilled enough to actually find the villages that forces like the Rangers and the U.S. Army seek to engage. Their willingness to assist in hunting down and often killing their fellow native peoples speaks to just how deep the divides could run between tribes. At the same time as some of the Ranger and Tonkawa scouts are tracking down the Comanches, local militia forces from around the area are being marshaled under the leadership of the relatively inexperienced Felix Huston. They receive word that they are to rendezvous with the Rangers at a designated spot on a small tributary of the San Marcos River, about 40 miles northeast of San Antonio. Huston and his volunteers arrive at this spot on what is today known as Plum Creek, then dismount and wait. They have placed themselves directly in line with the Comanche's path, and it will be only a short time until the lumbering Comanche party comes into view. But now, for all their bloodlust and anger, the relative neophytes to combat on the Texas frontier hesitate. The Comanche party, although composed in large part of women, children, and elderly members, is still far larger than the Texans. Though he has the advantage in position and firepower, plus the element of surprise, Huston is unwilling to make an outright attack on the party until the more experienced Rangers arrive. The more experienced Rangers, for their part, are all making their way as fast as possible to the scene. But they are coming from a variety of locations due to some having been out on patrols. Huston is undoubtedly in a difficult position. Should he make a cavalier charge, one he is ill-equipped to lead, he might lose many of his own men. However, should they abandon their element of surprise and take up a defensive position against this much larger force, they will ultimately be spotted and charged upon by the Comanche. Huston hurriedly weighs his options before ultimately choosing to remain where they are. He and his volunteers take up a defensive position, hunkering down and preparing to receive the Comanche charge that will eventually come when they are spotted. Within mere minutes, a number of charges are made by small detachments of warriors, breaking off from the larger party as it continues to move northward. The Comanche warriors, perhaps the best horsemen in the world at this time, begin to ride back and forth in front of their people, red streamers whipping in the wind and new top hats flying off of their heads. They ride treacherously close to the Texan lines, with some indeed losing their lives to Texan bullets. For the Comanche, though, as has been noted by several military tacticians, these are not offensive attacks meant to unseat the Texans from their ground. The Comanche intention, with their great visual display and seemingly complete disregard for their own personal well-being, is to create a distraction that will be so all-encompassing for their enemy that the retreat of their wives and children will go unnoticed. For roughly half an hour, these exchanges continue. As the veteran rangers begin to arrive and assess the situation, though, they become more and more impatient with Huston's refusal to take offensive action. Just as the growing consternation between the veteran rangers and the young officer is about to come to a head, a Comanche chief with a resplendent white shield leads a charge to within yards of the Texan's position. This time, however, the Texan's bullets manage to cut him down on his retreat back to his line, and at this point, everything changes. The Comanche, who believe a fortuitous warrior's medicine or spiritual powers will make him invulnerable to bullets, are so shaken by this that an all-out retreat begins. At this point, the veteran ranger's patience with Huston has been exhausted. Ben McCulloch, a legendary ranger captain, exhorts the veteran commander that, quote, "Now's the time to charge them. They are whipped." Every second they hesitate means more distance between themselves and the Comanche, and more importantly, the Comanche's captives. The Texans all mount their horses, and the Rangers lead the way in a running fight which ensues over roughly 15 miles of rolling prairies and cactus-strewn hills. The Comanche continue northward, toward the hillier country around the Colorado River, west of Austin. For hours arrows fly, screams and gunshots resound, and the air is thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and the iron-tinged aroma of blood. Bodies of men, women, and children litter the ground. The wounded are simply shot dead, without exception or mercy. Eventually, the volunteers and rangers regroup to assess their losses and to discuss their next course of action. They have inflicted at least 80 dead among the Comanche, and sent them fleeing for their lives into the hill country. By mathematical standards, the Battle of Plum Creek, as it would come to be known, is a resounding victory for the Texans. However, they have only recovered a fraction of the 3,000 head of horses that have been stolen. And though they had certainly hastened the retreat of their adversaries, the Texans as a whole had failed in achieving their primary objective, the recapturing of the hostages that had been taken by the Comanche. And when the scouting parties were sent out, they came upon the horrific consequences of their failure. Nancy Crosby was found not long before sundown. She had been tied to a tree, presumably all while crying out and fighting. As the battle whirled nearby, the gunshots and battle cries likely drowned out her desperate pleas to be spared. But she was not spared. Nancy Crosby was mercilessly shot with several Comanche arrows throughout her torso. Her death had likely been quick, but certainly not painless. The last week of Nancy Crosby's life, she had been kidnapped, assaulted, watched her baby killed in front of her, and subjected to endless torment and torture at the hands of her captors. Her only fleeting hope had seemed all too close, and then her life was ruthlessly snuffed out when her rescue was presumably only minutes away. It would seem that such horrors would be the exception. But Nancy Crosby's story was all too common on the bleeding frontier of Texas. For this was not the land of dime novels, nor tall tales. This was an unforgiving land that was seemingly inextricably ensconced in a cycle of violence, grief, and revenge. Nancy Crosby's life was seen as currency, as just retribution for the many Comanche who had been cut down in the streets of San Antonio. Those Comanche were killed in retribution for their treatment of Matilda Lockhart. Matilda Lockhart had been kidnapped and treated as a subhuman because she was of a people who were trespassing on the Comanche lands. And so, the story of the Old West goes, an endless succession of transgression and retribution. Many of the rangers there that day would go on to legendary careers and fight in some of the most significant battles in Texas history. Huston would forever be hampered in his political ambitions by the prevailing, and not wholly inaccurate, perception that he had cost at least some of the captives their lives due to his unwillingness to pursue more offensive tactics. The Battle of Plum Creek would be only the beginning in the Texans' conflict with the Comanche. However, it would mark the last time the Comanche would attempt raiding of such massive scale and scope. The bloodshed in Texas would not only carry on for decades to come, it would only intensify. But the many tales of raiding, rescue, and revenge on the Texas frontier are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a fellow history lover, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button down below. And finally, be sure to follow us on TikTok, on Instagram, and subscribe to our newsletter, the links to all of which are down below. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.